Welcome back, everyone. And to give this talk, we have Leanne Fitzpatrick, who is a proven data leader and has experience in empowering data science teams, both in small and startup businesses. And her talk will carry on with that topic, as she's going to be discussing about data science teams delivering a model and then using them to their fullest potential, overcoming challenging stakeholders, and also giving the best insights as possible and giving the value to the company. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to present Leanne Fitzpatrick from the Financial Times.
Thanks ever so much. Great start. I just wanted to say thanks ever so much for the lovely intro. Hello to everybody wherever you are, and if you're in Serbia, good afternoon to you all. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking a little bit about once you've delivered a model, what do you mean it's not adding value, which might be a question you get from your business. So a little bit about me before we get started. So as introduced, I'm the Director of Data Science at the Financial Times. So naturally, I'm a big data lover, but also in my free time, I have lots of other interests. I'm a big American football fan, get dressed up as a Cincinnati Bengal Tiger every so often. I'm a lover of beer and whiskey, so here I am making some beer. I have a tripod dog called Seaweed, who I rescued in Texas. And I'm getting into golf. So that will give you a bit of inspiration for why I think not just in a data way, but also around more collectively, because I have very different interests and think much more about how these can be applied into the business too. And so back in 2019, I was very privileged to be able to come along to the Data Science Conference and talk to you all about architecting for data science success. And in that talk, I talked a little bit about how people, tools and processes could come together to be able to deliver data science and really drive success for your business. And what we most specifically talked about was how you think about team development of your people, the tools that you would need to deliver value, and also the business collaboration you would need for your business processes. And so looking a little bit back to that talk, what we talked about was architecting people for team development, was figuring out the purpose of your team. So what's the business problem that you're looking at, the skill set that you have, what's your budget to be able to look at help with the business, and also the infrastructure in terms of your team development and architecture. We talked a bit about expertise, so having to maybe the need to think about different industry domains, think about different data types from relational to non-relational, and also the problem types. We thought about hiring and retention, so how could you retain your staff through different programs of work, like enabling them through training and toolkits through development frameworks, like thinking about operational business pipelines. And we also talked about the need for cross-functional data teams and that we didn't just need data scientists. We then also went on to talk a little bit about the tools that you need for value realization. So how do you get something from development into production to actually have a business decision? So we talked about the modeling functionality and how you might need trustworthiness from the different developments and packages out there. We talked about the development environments that you might create your data science capabilities in. So thinking about how they might be fit for purpose in terms of package and dependency management, needing consistency into your deployment environments and the scalability of those. We talked about sharing capabilities. So how do we keep the project ongoing through things like version control and good documentation, and creating institutional memory for good team practices. And we talked about some data management processes using lineage schemas. And model deployment, exposing the model as a service and scaling it so the business could consume it. And finally, we then talked a little bit about having the business processes for collaboration, and a reminder that the business often expects something that's quite different from reality. The success metrics are a key way to kind of bridge that gap between what somebody might expect and what you can deliver in terms of a data science project, making sure you have the right stakeholders on board, and myth busting. We also talked about data and making sure that you have the right quality and governance processes in place to think about that. And then the project process, so making sure that you're taking a more MVP style approach. We touched a little bit on that knowledge sharing and back to that documentation, but also how you could use conferences like these or meetups to be able to learn new techniques for collaboration. So that seemed like a huge list of things that we got through when I talked a couple of years ago. And what you might be thinking, well, I'm doing all of that. So if I'm deploying models in a really healthy functioning team, what could go wrong? Because what if I'm doing all those things? Well, you could be in a position where you have too many models. Fundamentally, you've developed lots and lots of MVPs, and now you're in a position where you have 50, 100, 150 predictive models all running, and you don't know quite how to make head or tail of them or how to support them all. You could have limited human resource capacity to actually support those, and you could be under pressure to be maybe creating even more developments and not thinking about how you're going to support the ongoing models because you only have so many people in your team. You might actually have the business questioning the value of your team. So now we're no longer fussed about how a model might actually, how many models a team has actually created, but thinking much more about actually what does that model do in terms of making a difference in the business? What action is it trying to change in our business behavior? We might also be struggling to actually embed those models into our operational pipelines. So whilst it might be in a production ecosystem and actually be in a deployment pipeline somewhere, it might not actually be consumed by the people you thought it's going to be. So actually, how do we get those into the pipelines where that business action is going to be taken, whether it's by a stakeholder who's just making decisions off a board report, right through to maybe the fact that somebody's pulling a BigQuery table or a piece of data and asset from another place that they don't really quite understand. We also could have a position based on that where we end up with a bit of a misuse of model outputs, where something that we built for one purpose, such as a churn propensity model, could be used for some completely different reason, such as maybe a step-up marketing program, where actually we're, instead of trying to figure out prevention of churn, we're trying to use a different outcome, and that means that our model is not fit for purpose. Finally, we might be thinking about how we're going to help with our model drift and healthy performance, because you might not have enough capacity or time, back to our first 2 bullet points, to actually be monitoring what's happening with your models and seeing whether or not they're actually still performing as they did when you first trained them. And another one is governance and compliance. So are those models actually still being in a correct governance environment? And obviously the previous talk went on about some of the governance considerations you need to have. And those are some of the things you'll need to take into consideration once you've actually deployed these models. And then any upstream and downstream pipeline changes, so any impacts that could be changing the nature of your data that's coming to and from the model that you have. And there's many, many more things that could potentially go wrong, even after you've considered all those people, tools, and processes considerations from this to get through the door in terms of deploying a model. And so when we think about that, we can start thinking about how do we want to start architecting for data science success of the future. So back to our tools, people, and process, we're really thinking about how we want to think about our continued success. So now our people, when we think about those, we're thinking about the diverse skill sets that we need. Maybe we need some product leads in order to help us maintain and shape those products. In terms of the engineering talent that we have, how do we actually curate out and engineer the right talent for the teams and mixed skill set that we have? And how do we continue to progress and grow a very mixed capability of team where we have people who have more of an operational and infrastructural view? In terms of the tools, we want to be able to therefore enable data products rather than projects. We want to do that through production ecosystems that support these products and be able to monitor and maintain and make things accessible to everybody across the diverse team that we have. And finally, one of the most important parts is around the processes that we need to evolve. We need to think much more about our communication strategy and how we develop that to be able to actually educate the business about what these models do and how to use them in the right environment. Also actually about what the data science team is up to around, are they continuing to curate existing and enhance existing models, or are they developing new things? We also need to be able to spot opportunity gaps for new capabilities, whilst also doing all the maintenance of the current capabilities we have. You also want to be able to incorporate some business feedback, and this is really critical to actually understanding how to enhance those models and capabilities. And that goes back to that product lifecycle, where you actually want to have product leads thinking about the ongoing need of the life of that data product. And we want to keep developing our operational pipelines so that all of this can be considered. But I believe at the heart of these things, in terms of the continued growth of data science, is actually the value. And in terms of value, what we really mean by this is the universal business language, which is money. So how can we translate our models into economic value? So characteristics of model value: as a data scientist, we want to think about things making better decisions, but actually there's a whole range of ways that models can make better decisions. So those might be optimizing a particular process or practice. It might be making something more efficient so that you can enhance the production capability of a particular team or area. It might be around retention, so either retaining staff through some kind of HR predictive model, or retaining your customers in terms of if you're working in a B2C or B2B business. You might be making better experience for the clients or customers of your business. So you might be curating something as a better experience that might then lead into the retention. You might also be automating, so you might be doing some kind of robotic process automation to help with some kind of task efficiencies. You might be actually improving the quality of a process through your modeling. You might also be actually thinking about, how am I going to make my business more sustainable? So what are the types of models that I can create that mean that the business will be around in 10 years, 100 years? And also the value could also be the status that you bring the company with some of these excellent modeling and business decisions that you're going to make. But when we as data scientists look at modeling and we think about performance, we're often thinking of things in a traditional performance, through a traditional performance lens. So we're thinking of things like precision and recall, accuracy metrics, which assess the performance of our model and the success of it. Now, when we think about recall precision, how do we understand which is better in the lies of our value metrics that we just talked through? And so what we have to start thinking about is, how do we define value to the business in terms of the performance, and in making sure that the performance changes are articulated in value driving behaviors. So for example, precision is the proportion of correct predictions that we may have. So an outcome of that may be that we're reducing false positives, is increasing the correct business activity that we want to take. And equally, proportion of a recall is a proportion of identified correctly. So in this case, we're reducing false negatives in order to minimize our missed opportunities. So how would we translate this into an example? Well, if we were thinking about improving our churn rates in a business, so the number of people that may leave, in terms of reducing our false positives, that's going to be a reduction in any unnecessary retention activities. So for example, if we were unnecessarily contacting certain people who weren't going to go on to churn, that would be an unnecessary activity. And equally, that drives the business value of increased productivity. And in terms of reducing our false negatives, this would be aligned with the business action of increasing our correct retention activities. And so the value driving behavior for the business is that we get decreased churn. So more people, more money. So how does that literally translate to pounds when we think about our precision curves? So if we're reducing our false negatives, and that's going to drive a reduction in churn, so i.e. this is our false negative reduction, what we might have thought of in our original business rules is we might have 10,000 predictions that or labels that we have each month that we believe are people that are going to churn. And that current false negative rate might be 15%. What that means is that we're currently missing 1,500 users who would have gone on to churn. And then we see our new model, it's actually down to a false negative rate of 5%. And so we've actually improved this model by quite a substantial amount, and we're only missing 500 opportunities. So the value driving behavior that we see is that we have an additional 1,000 new opportunities per month. That means that we have, if we were to think about that with a retention success rate, so i.e. once those people are being contacted and they actually decided to stay, or there was some kind of intervention activity and the success of that intervention activity was 20%, and the value of that user staying with the business, either defined by some lifetime value metric, the annual revenue per user, or some other business identified way of understanding what the cost of a user is to keep, the value of a user who's kept, you would end up with £80,000 per month in additional revenue by taking 20% of that 1,000 and £400 of recognised additional value. Similarly, if we want to reduce our false positives, what we're thinking about is better productivity. So if we look at how our false positive rate changes, perhaps it's changed from 8%, where we're actually missing 800 opportunities, and we reduce that down to 4%. So now it's only 400 opportunities that are missed. Then the reduction in incorrect predictions per month is 400. And if we're incorrectly, therefore, offering a discount to those of 50%, we're losing £200 for our customers that would have not gone on to churn anyway. And so what that means is that if say we were a successful retention team who were offering the incorrect customers this crazy offer, and for every 1 in 3 of those people took that offer, and now we actually identify the correct people, and I don't offer those people that wouldn't have churned, we could be saving something like £24,000 per month by reducing the number of incorrect identified churners and removing those from the marketing activity. And coupling both together, therefore, the false improvement in false negative and false positive rate, and driving that into that pound value, you can couple these together into an overall model performance value. So a few examples of where we might actually see this play out. So if you had better targeting, that would mean that you would have an improved campaign efficiency, so a lower cost of acquisition. So you would go through the same behavior where you're looking at your false positives and your false negatives and understand what that actually means in terms of having a lower cost of acquisition. Similarly, you could have improved recommendations. So this value driving behavior would be increased engagement and loyalty, and therefore increased revenue from that increased engagement. Equally, if you were building things like an improved fraud detection, you would have an improved capturing of fraud events, and therefore a reduced loss and increase in revenue through both the false positives and false negatives. And you might be thinking, well, actually, I'm optimizing logistics, I'm optimizing a delivery route. And actually, you therefore want to translate your business value into increased efficiency and decrease labor costs. And finally, error prevention might mean that you have improved customer satisfaction, and therefore the value driving would be decreased churn and increased revenue. And any improvement in data science processes would always mean that you would have increased resource efficiency, and that would mean that you would have capability to create more products. So you'd then be able to feed that back into this loop of the different projects you're working on. So what I'm trying to say here is it's time to make friends with finance. Finance need to be our friends. Whilst we can apply the performance and success metrics and logic, what we need from them is to be able to help us to identify the right return on investment from the business action. the model outcome is still just a proxy for probability and not a given. And that's something that I would be really clear with when you're talking to your finance friends. And finance folks can work with uncertainty as long as they understand why. So as long as you're explaining to them that this is a probability that this is going to happen and provide some information around maybe your confidence intervals, they can work with those numbers to help you understand what the ROI would be for that activity. So what does that mean for going back to our architecting for success? Well, I saw this great image on LinkedIn, and I really thought it was really valuable to kind of picture what I'm talking about here. And you might have an ideal world where you want to have some innovation and experimentation in your team, adding new capabilities, continue to enhance the existing capabilities that you're creating. You might want to you're going to have to probably manage some complexity in terms of your business as usual. And as ever, there's always going to be some kind of ad hoc, unplanned work and interruptions. And what we don't want to do is end up in a situation where we are just adding new capabilities and doing the BAU stuff, because we'd end up in a position where we're just trying to keep the ship sailing rather than actually navigating it. And so if we think about how we articulate that back to the business and why you want to shape yourself around the first column, is that adding new capabilities and enhancing our existing capabilities is our core value generators. In terms of our innovation and experiments we want to do, those are going to be our high risk and high reward. So we want a little bit of that too. But those are going to be a bit more unprecedented. Some of them might potentially not turn out how we want them to, or actually drive the value we expected. Managing complexity will generally be our operational sunk costs. So having kind of time to maybe deal with some of the architectural considerations or the operational ineffectiveness that we might have as a team, in terms of maybe we don't have the best documentation and we need to spend some time developing that. And then I've classed unplanned work interruptions as keeping up appearances. I think people always want to kind of just check in and see how the data science is doing. Can someone please help us with this? And I don't think that's always the best use of our time. And so successful data science projects, we really need to remember that they don't have any end. So whilst we're thinking about how we create our projects and then put them into production, once we've then created them into production, they might need to go back through that, the initial kind of data science life cycle in terms of understanding the project, getting the right data, transforming that data, modeling, and then enhancing that capability, as we've talked about, back then into production, where you can be monitoring. So what does this actually mean for our architecture in terms of people? Well, we really want to think about the way that we can structure our people to support this. So when you're planning for who you're going to have actioning what projects, we need to think of people being aligned to enhancing our existing capabilities first, because hopefully those things that you've decided to continue driving forward are your most value driving behaviors. Then we can start thinking about those people being associated with the new capabilities and the new asks from the business. We might be having to think about managing complexity, but what I would like to say is that you should be thinking about how your new capabilities can solve for some of the complexity. So I've put this in third because ideally these should become backlog items that you can then have your people working on. So it's in a close fourth, but really it should say third, because that's where then we really want to have this high risk, high reward on innovation and experimentation. And finally, when you're able to then start explaining the value that you can drive, you've got some arguments to push back on that pound value piece. What does it mean for our tools? Well, we need to start moving on from just getting the model into the ecosystem. Model deployment is definitely not the end. We need to think much more around our monitoring and model drift, and setting up recalibration alerts when performance or features shift. So using that people resource to develop these capabilities. You also need to be brave about validating and purging any models that should no longer be in your ecosystem. So assess models in accordance to the status in the business. Are they actually being used actively? Are they dormant? Were they more research models? Why are you maintaining those if they're not driving the right value? And also finally, incident management. We should be looking to engage our operations teams who can actually help us with our deployment to support our critical functionality. So if things go wrong with our models, it's not our last minute scramble for a data scientist to be able to support. And in terms of our process, there's a whole bunch of things that this means, but I just wanted to kind of give an example of how a good process how a bad process might not give the most desired results. So recently we've seen that Zillow, who's a housing lister similar to Zoopla, set up a side business for buying and selling houses. And some of you in the data science community might have seen this story. The data science team uses Facebook's open source time series forecasting model Profit to forecast the housing market. And what we've seen is that this was used by and consumed by the business to buy and sell houses, which has since been recognised as a bit of a mistake, perhaps, or misuse of the model. I can't confirm that all the details around it, but the community have started to see that actually using this type of model to determine this type of business behaviour might have not been the best use. And therefore, it goes back to the fact that the process is all around the collaboration that you have. Subsequently, Zillow lost 300 million due to purchasing homes based on this forecast that they can now no longer sell. And so continuing your architecture for success needs to couple together the next advancement of people, tools, and processes. And that's everything I had to say today. Thanks ever so much for joining and listening, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Brilliant. It's amazing. Thank you for this wonderful talk. And as you said, a continuation from 2019. And speaking on that topic, because we talked about it back then, how do you see the landscape changing from 2019 to now? What were the advancements since then?
I definitely think machine learning operations is a huge, the buzzword and also the key thing that we're seeing at the moment. I think the vendors and the capabilities we have in terms of moving things from development into deployment are so much better than they were in 2018, 2019. And people actually understand the problems that data scientists have in terms of we're not software engineers. We don't understand continuous integration, continuous development for data models. Also, it's quite unique that you've got to couple together your model artifact with your code, with the data underneath, and understanding how to do things like data version control and model version control. And we actually have vendors on the market now and open source capabilities to actually deal with some of that rather than having to build it all ourselves. So I think there's a huge awareness and a huge appetite for actually understanding that it's not just developing a model and then trying to figure out how to put it in production and then figure out what that actually means for the business. I think actually there's a lot more processes and practice and rigor. I think the next thing that I'd like to see is some safety for us as data scientists, that it's not all on just us around that rigor, but actually some of those methods and capabilities help with kind of safety nets of governance. That would be wonderful.
Brilliant. I got one more question, and this is more of a, let's say, who should approach who first? You talked about make friends in the financial department. So who should go? Is it like a mutual thing we both go, or who should make that first step? Is it up to them to realize that the added value that data science can use, or is it up to the data scientists when they figure out that the value isn't coming in from their models, to try and seek out why that isn't happening? So who do you think should make that first step?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you're at in the business and what type of business you're in. But I'm a big advocate of being more proactive. And through my career, I've found that I've always been the proactive one to go to to finance first, rather than finance coming to data science. I think that also shows that you're kind of making a bridge into that finance world. And you might need somebody to help you with some of the lingo and kind of have a bit of some dictionaries between you in terms of what you mean by forecast and what they mean by a forecast. But I think if you can go to the table, they'll be much more willing to help you.
As you said, making friends always useful. That's it for the questions. Thank you once again for attending the conference. I hope you enjoyed the experience again, even though it is virtual more. And hope to see you next year as well. So thank you.
Thanks ever so much, and thanks for having me all. Thanks.
Yeah.